Already. So what do you want me to say now that
You started talking about Australia and
why Australia has a, such a vibrant community. I think it's because they're so isolated geographically. And I think they've created because there was more need. And, it's Mari and Jenny and Petra. There's a whole gang of them. And they just felt that their work wasn't validated or had any legitimacy. So they basically said, well, to do this, we have to make it happen. And they couldn't kind of sustain it by Mother Mirci because it was just, geographically too far away. And as I was saying earlier, I think what I find intriguing is that there's more motherhood scholars, at least in this generation, not earlier with Ruddock and Rich and, Chodorow, but in this generation, women say between 35 and 55, they mainly are Canadians, are motherhood scholars. Like, you look through the program and there's a lot of Canadians doing motherhood studies. So people have actually asked me that. They go, why is it really happening in Canada and not in the US, where obviously it's a bigger country? I really don't have the answer to that.
Bigger country, they don't even have paid leave.
Yeah, I know. You think that they would be the ones, so urgently needing this, right? I don't know. And generally, universities in U.S. are far better funded than they are in Canada, right? Because I don't agree with private education, but, the average university in Canada and U.S., faculty are paid better. They have far more travel money. They have far more research grants. There's a whole endowment system. There are far more grants available outside of the government in Canada. There are no endowments. There's no donors. There's nothing. There's only the government that you can apply for research funding. There's people always say to me, well, Mirci's broke. Why don't you just get a donor? Or why don't you get an endowment from somebody? And I go, because that culture doesn't exist in Canada. It exists in the States, that people have money. So the university, not all universities in the States, but a lot of them are so moneyed.
One of the things that I lecture about is that I discovered that, remember you did the campaign?
Yes.
Motherhood is not a liability?
Yes, and we have the pins here too. We found all the old pins there.
Do you know what I lecture about? Just at basically the same time in Israel, a group that formed that's called Mothers Demand Change.
Mm-hmm.
In Israel, where lots and lots of mothers discovered that, hey, it's not a private situation, that they are not getting back to work. These very highly educated women are not being accepted. They all so each of them obviously for many years felt, it's my fault. And so they got together and then they did a campaign that's called Motherhood is Not a Crime.
Oh, really? Oh, that's interesting.
Where they took pictures of themselves with their tummies and bars like they were wearing, and at almost the same time that you did, Motherhood is Not a Liability.
That is so interesting. Yes. But it's not taken seriously, It as a scholarly, I think there has been change in the last 10 years, maybe more, but when I didn't get that grant, it's not the research officer's fault, obviously, but I kept pressing, why didn't we get the funding, right? Because we'd had it the year before, we had the startup grant, and then they didn't renew it under a different category of competition. We had to move up to another one, and it's never guaranteed, but it's kind of implied that if you get the startup grant, which is really hard to get, we got at very minimal money, but they said, so you apply in the next round in established publishers category. So that's fine. And we did all the work, 50, 80 hours of work. And then we didn't get it. And I'm like, okay, that's fine. I understand that, there's a learning curve and you have to, improve. I've written probably 100 grants. But the woman just said, so I kept saying, what is it? And she basically said that we think you have too much of a niche market, that there just won't be enough interest in the topic to sustain your publication roster, that you're eventually going to run out of topics and run out of readers. And I'm like, what? And I said, 80% of women worldwide become mothers. And I think, I'll go to my grave before we exhaust the topics that can be studied, right, in terms of... And she kept saying no. And then what got me particularly angry, because this grant in Canada funds a lot of specialty presses. So, for example, there's a press in Canada that publishes only on Canadian theatre. And I'm like, okay, you give them money, but you don't give us money. And I think, I'm not dissing Canadian theatre, because I love theatre, but obviously Canadian theatre is a far more niche market than mothering. And that's why we didn't get it. And I said, well, tell me exactly what they said.